The snowfall arrived without interruption. There were no pauses, no opportunities for Alaska to recover. By early morning, cleared pathways had vanished beneath fresh accumulation. Structures that appeared secure hours earlier now buckled under additional mass. Thoroughfares cleaned at daybreak were invisible again by late morning. Throughout the region, a somber understanding emerged. This situation couldn't be simply endured. The weather system showed no signs of relenting. Forecasters had predicted rainfall. Instead, Alaskans found themselves trapped in an intensifying winter event. Dense, water-laden precipitation descended rapidly enough to undo human efforts within moments. Snow removal became futile. Clearing operations provided only temporary relief. Each attempt felt like beginning anew. Residents had abandoned fighting the conditions. They were pursuing an impossible goal and falling further behind with each passing hour. In Juneau, the state capital, accumulation measured in feet rather than inches, clinging to structures and blanketing mountainsides positioned directly above residential areas. In Anchorage, frozen barriers climbed beyond 10 feet, obscuring lines of sight and leaving municipal authorities without disposal options. Meanwhile, in the state's inland regions, Fairbanks confronted an entirely different peril. Mercury levels dropped approaching negative 40 degrees, where errors don't cause obvious injury. They eliminate people silently. What distinguished this weather event wasn't merely its severity. The defining characteristic was its persistence. No respite, no intermission, no overnight reprieve, just relentless strain on dwellings, systems, and already drained populations. The crisis wasn't about a single day's precipitation totals. It concerned what occurs when winter maintains constant pressure. Because when severe weather refuses to subside, time becomes your adversary. Weariness accumulates, infrastructure falls behind schedule, and continuing forward transitions from being about readiness to being about sheer perseverance. The critical question isn't regarding Alaska's initial impact. The real inquiry becomes, how long can communities persist when winter conditions maintain unbroken intensity? By dawn, it had become evident that human effort couldn't match the situation's demands. Precipitation outpaced response capabilities, and every recovery attempt disappeared almost instantaneously. Pathways clear before sunrise were submerged again by morning meal times. Secondary routes cleaned at first light vanished before midday. The system wasn't intensifying. It maintained steady force hour after hour without showing exhaustion. In southeastern Alaska, precipitation rates exceeded 2 inches hourly, heavy and moisture-saturated. This wasn't the lightweight powder many associate with cold seasons. It adhered to surfaces. Shovels grew heavier with each movement. Snow clearing machines became clogged. Building tops gained mass faster than it could be eliminated. Residents quickly discovered that increased effort didn't improve efficiency. It simply hastened fatigue. Municipal maintenance teams shifted to emergency prioritization almost immediately. Medical facility access received top priority. Critical emergency routes followed. Residential thoroughfares dropped to lowest priority, not due to unimportance, but because available equipment and time couldn't maintain everything. Teams cleared what they could, fully aware these same locations would be buried again before shift changes. Psychologically, this marked a turning point. Winter storms typically follow patterns, strike forcefully, then permit recovery. This one shattered that cycle. Precipitation rates didn't decrease. Sight distance didn't improve. No opportunity existed to reorganize. People stopped questioning when it would conclude and began accepting the possibility it wouldn't, at least not imminently. Morning brought the initial wave of depletion. Not merely physical, but cognitive. The understanding settled quietly. Advancement was fleeting. Exhaustion was constant, and the weather wasn't compromising. Alaska wasn't failing due to inadequate preparation. It was failing because the accumulation never provided sufficient recovery time. By midday, one reality had crystallized. This winter wasn't evaluating strength. It was evaluating endurance. By afternoon, The storm ceased feeling like meteorological phenomena and began functioning like an unstoppable force. Accumulation was no longer something to relocate. It became something that compressed downward, adding mass minute by minute. The hazard wasn't blowing precipitation or frozen roadways. It was gravitational force quietly amplified by tons of saturated accumulation. In coastal regions, the precipitation felt dense and waterlogged, compacting firmly onto structures and vegetation. Dwellings constructed to withstand winter suddenly felt precarious. Roof edges drooped. Drainage systems disappeared. Accumulation slid off in chunks, crashing onto walkways and accumulating against walls with nowhere else to settle. Residents climbed ladders and accessed rooftops, racing to remove mass before it reached critical thresholds. Every choice involved risk. Remove too little and face structural failure. Remove too much and risk falling into deep accumulation below. Vegetation began failing under the burden. Limbs fractured without warning, severing electrical lines and plunging communities into darkness. Power company teams advanced into areas on foot and with specialized footwear, working through accumulation that consumed their legs with each movement. Restoring electricity became a competition against dropping temperatures and human limitations. Above population centers, strain accumulated in more threatening forms. Accumulation loaded onto precipitous mountain faces overlooking inhabited zones, heightening the possibility of avalanches that didn't require backcountry activity to activate them. These represented urban dangers, steep surfaces positioned directly above residences. Weather specialists issued elevated risk advisories, and voluntary departures followed for residents situated beneath recognized slide trajectories. Midday represented the moment concern transformed. This wasn't about becoming trapped anymore. It concerned whether structures would endure, whether vegetation would collapse, whether mountains would shift. Accumulation had become mass, and mass inflicts harm silently. By afternoon's arrival, Alaska wasn't questioning total accumulation amounts. It was questioning how much additional weight the terrain and its inhabitants could bear. By afternoon, the challenge was no longer precipitation rate. It became disposal location. In Alaska's urban centers, physical space itself became the constraining element. Roadways that had narrowed throughout morning were now barely navigable channels carved between frozen walls. Every clearing operation made routes temporarily usable, then relocated the challenge elsewhere. In Anchorage, frozen barriers climbed past 10 feet, rising sufficiently to obstruct vision at junctions and curves. Motorists advanced forward blindly, hoping intersecting traffic wasn't doing likewise. Clearing alone couldn't address the situation. Removal transformed into relocation. Teams began transporting millions of cubic yards to designated disposal locations just to maintain major arteries operational. It was gradual, costly, and draining, and the weather continued adding more. Residential communities felt the consequences immediately. Dead-end streets filled faster than machinery could return. Vehicles vanished beneath fresh accumulation. Emergency personnel warned that arrival times were extending, not because teams weren't mobilizing, but because deep accumulation physically decelerated everything. Moments mattered, and the accumulation was consuming them. Sight distance became its own safety concern. Frozen barriers turned routine travel into challenging courses. Pedestrians disappeared behind white walls. Children and animals were nearly undetectable against the accumulation. Even during daylight, the municipality felt confined, enclosed by frozen obstacles that restructured how people navigated and perceived one another. This marked the moment infrastructure quietly lost advantage. Anchorage wasn't failing spectacularly. Nothing collapsed simultaneously. Instead, the municipality fell behind, progressively buried, not by a singular catastrophe, but by accumulation that never paused sufficiently to recover from. By late afternoon, one reality became inescapable. You cannot outclear a storm that doesn't cease. And you cannot create space rapidly enough when winter keeps claiming it. As evening descended, the weather shifted character again. Precipitation continued, but frigid conditions intensified their hold, converting every minor oversight into a serious hazard. In Alaska's interior, temperatures descended toward negative 40 degrees, where machinery fails, batteries expire, and human mistakes have no forgiveness period. This wasn't the type of cold that announces itself dramatically. It operated quietly, reducing alternatives and abbreviating timelines. In Fairbanks, the precipitation appeared deceptively gentle, light dry, almost massless. But wind converted that powder into weaponized accumulation, stacking it against barriers and vehicles within moments. Vehicles left operating excessively long froze over. Motors shut down and wouldn't restart. Sight distance collapsed as ice fog developed, freezing emissions and moisture into a cloudy haze that limited vision to mere feet. Vehicles materialized suddenly, then disappeared as if consumed by the atmosphere itself. Within residences, danger advanced undetected. Heating systems operated continuously, drawing air through openings that were gradually vanishing beneath accumulation. Emission outlets clogged. Carbon monoxide detectors activated across communities. Chimney incidents increased as heating equipment was stressed beyond typical parameters. Emergency teams responded cautiously, understanding that exposure calculated in minutes could result in frostbite or worse. Educational institutions made uncommon decisions to transition entirely to distance learning, not because students couldn't manage the cold, but because waiting outdoors, even momentarily, could prove life-threatening. Delivery vehicles encountered delays as highways closed periodically. Residents began conserving movement, scheduling excursions carefully, preserving energy like a limited resource. Evening was when the weather felt most intimate. The external environment contracted, glass surfaces frosted, sound vanished beneath accumulation and cold. In that quietness, Alaska absorbed a difficult lesson. Severe cold doesn't punish audibly. It awaits weariness, inattention, or overconfidence, and then it eliminates safety margins entirely. By darkness, the weather had outlasted systems, and people intervened where infrastructure could no longer maintain pace. Government response remained operational, but extended thin by exhaustion, equipment constraints, and sheer magnitude. In numerous locations, continuation quietly transitioned from coordinated operations to neighbor assistance. Throughout Alaska, informal networks formed almost automatically. Shovel groups organized on residential streets, clearing passages for elderly residents and healthcare professionals who needed access. Snow vehicles replaced trucks, navigating through accumulation that had consumed roadways, delivering medication, fuel, and provisions to residences and cabins that were no longer vehicularly accessible. What couldn't be repaired quickly was circumvented, one individual assisting another. Warming facilities filled as electrical failures and hazardous housing conditions forced people indoors. Shelters achieved maximum capacity, compelling communities to open public facilities as temporary havens for Alaska's homeless population. The peril was immediate and merciless. Volunteers provided blankets, heated meals, and cold weather equipment, recognizing that exposure under these circumstances could become fatal within hours. Within residences, households modified their patterns. Illumination was minimized. Heat was preserved. External excursions were strategically planned, each treated as a measured risk rather than a standard task. Parents inspected furnace vents before sleeping. Residents messaged to verify carbon monoxide detectors were operational. Readiness ceased being theoretical. It became everyday routine. Nighttime was when the weather's psychological burden intensified. Weariness deepened. Muscles ached. Rest arrived in brief intervals, interrupted by sounds of accumulation sliding from structures or distant machinery, fighting an unwinnable struggle. But it was also when resilience manifested most distinctly. By night's conclusion, one truth emerged. When winter overwhelms infrastructure, communities become the final defense. And in Alaska, that defense maintained not because the weather eased, but because people refused to confront it in isolation. When the weather system finally releases its hold, Alaska will continue recovery, physically, economically, and psychologically. What transpired here wasn't simply about precipitation measurements or temperature records. It concerned endurance, about what occurs when winter stops functioning like an incident and begins operating like a persistent condition. This weather system didn't overwhelm Alaska because people were negligent or inadequately prepared. It overwhelmed Alaska because it never ceased. Accumulation fell faster than humans could address. Cold eliminated mistakes instantaneously. Infrastructure reached boundaries that no experience level could overcome. And when systems fell behind, continuation depended on something far more fundamental. Neighbors assisting neighbors, communities bridging gaps, and people adjusting in real time. Alaska is frequently viewed as exceptional, a location constructed for extremes. But what this winter demonstrated is troubling. If a state engineered around cold can be challenged this severely, what implications does that hold for other regions? Extreme winter isn't becoming more spectacular, it's becoming more continuous. And continuity is what fractures systems. If this account helped you comprehend what sustained extreme winter genuinely resembles in practical terms, consider pressing the approval button. It assists this content in reaching additional people who value severe weather readiness and real-world consequences. Distribute this content with acquaintances or relatives, particularly anyone residing in areas where winter storms are growing more powerful, prolonged, and more challenging to recover from. Now, we invite your perspective. If your municipality encountered continuous accumulation and severe cold for extended periods without interruption, how long do you believe it could maintain function? Do you maintain a strategy for electrical failures, obstructed routes, or assisting someone unable to assist themselves? Share your perspectives in the comment section. Your knowledge matters, and it might assist someone else in preparing before winter chooses not to relent. Remain secure, remain warm, and remain knowledgeable.